they were the first to name you to the development squad. Just what were their conversations with you about just what that is and what your role will be?
Yeah, I mean, I think for lack of better terms, it's kind of a red shirt for rookies, and I'm super excited for the opportunity. I'm grateful that they even considered me to be in that position, so I think I'm just taking it one day at a time and really leaning into the process.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into everything that's been surfacing around Justine Pat and the latest developments from Indiana Fever training camp, because the deeper these reports go, the more compelling this entire situation becomes. To set the stage, I was following commentary from Chloe Peterson, whether it was a live session or a stream discussion, and she was joined by Tony East and Brian Hansen, with Scott Agnes also remaining one of the most reliable voices closely tracking the Fever in real time. These are the reporters actually on the ground, delivering meaningful observations instead of recycled narratives or shallow reactions. And based on what they've been sharing, several details are beginning to stand out, especially when the conversation shifts toward Justine Pat. She's becoming one of the most intriguing names in camp for multiple reasons, and Fever fans are clearly starting to take notice. At 6 feet 4 inches, she brings rare size to the floor, yet moves with the fluidity and instincts of a guard, and on top of that, she possesses a shooting ability that can completely change the pace of a game. That kind of skill set by itself is incredibly uncommon. Truly one of the hardest combinations to find in modern basketball. Players with that level of size who can consistently stretch the floor while also handling perimeter responsibilities are exceptionally rare, and that makes her profile even more valuable. When you examine the Indiana Fever's roster structure, her importance becomes even clearer. The team has an unusual balance, loaded with guards across every variation from primary ball handlers to combo creators, while also carrying established frontcourt pieces at the 4 and 5. But the one area where they noticeably lack depth is on the wing. They don't have enough true 6 feet 2 inches to 6 feet 4 inches players who can seamlessly shift between the 3 and 4 spots, guard multiple assignments, and provide offensive spacing. That specific player archetype has become one of the most sought-after roles in today's game, and Pat aligns with that mold, especially on the offensive side. But this is where the story takes a more complicated turn. Even with her upside, and despite the roster's obvious need for someone with her tools, the reports strongly suggest that her chances of remaining with the Indiana Fever beyond the next few weeks are surprisingly slim. And the reason for that uncertainty isn't poor performance. If anything, the exact opposite appears to be true. She's currently signed under a developmental contract, which is a critical detail in understanding her situation. That type of deal does not secure her a permanent place on the main roster, and within a relatively short time frame, roughly a couple of weeks, other WNBA teams have the opportunity to step in and offer her a standard roster position if they are willing to create space. That immediately turns her future into a race against time. So the real question becomes, how has she actually looked in camp? Because that matters more than anything else. According to Chloe Peterson and other close observers, there hasn't been extensive access to full scrimmages so far. Much of what has been publicly visible has centered around defensive drills, structured schemes, and team-focused sessions. In those environments, Justine Pat has reportedly looked impressively strong on the defensive end. And that carries major significance, because entering the professional level, defense was widely viewed as the biggest concern surrounding her game. During her time at Vanderbilt, she was never viewed as a shutdown defender. Lateral quickness was considered a weakness, and there were legitimate concerns about whether she could consistently stay in front of elite WNBA caliber athletes. That was the major question surrounding her transition to the professional level. But the reports emerging now suggest a different story is beginning to unfold. Her length, size, and extended wingspan are creating noticeable disruption on the floor. She's contesting shots effectively, closing off passing lanes, and using her physical tools to influence possessions in ways that go beyond pure speed. Even if she isn't the quickest player in every matchup, that reach is compensating in a significant way. And that changes everything. Because if she can become even an average defender, someone reliable enough to avoid being targeted, then you're suddenly looking at a 6 feet 4 inches player capable of shooting near 40% from 3 while holding her ground defensively. That isn't just a useful role player, that is one of the most valuable profiles in the league. Every franchise is searching for that exact combination. Which is why the Fever's handling of the situation begins to raise questions. Reports indicate the organization may have already settled on its final 12-player roster before training camp has fully unfolded. If that's true, then players like Pat were never genuinely competing for a spot. Instead, they entered camp on developmental contracts with the understanding that they would not break into the main roster immediately. That's highly unusual, because most teams leave room for real competition and allow camp performances to shape final decisions. Typically, teams allow camp performance to determine outcomes and reward the players who earn their place. But in this case, it increasingly sounds like many of those choices were finalized long before competition truly began. And if that is accurate, then Pat's performance may have little influence on her chances, regardless of how strong she looks. That's where the comparison to someone like KK Timpson becomes especially frustrating for observers. From what has been seen both in domestic play and overseas opportunities, Timpson has shown flashes. Her athleticism, length, and shot-blocking instincts are legitimate strengths. But in terms of consistent production, she has not yet demonstrated enough to fully justify a guaranteed roster spot at this stage. Yet she appears to be in a far more secure position. Meanwhile, Pat, who fits one of the most valuable player archetypes in the modern game, remains on the outside despite reportedly excelling in the areas that have been visible during camp. That contrast is exactly what has people questioning the process. And when you look at the broader market, the significance becomes even clearer. Players standing 6 feet 3 inches to 6 feet 4 inches who can knock down threes at a high level while offering even moderate defensive upside are exceptionally rare. There are only a small number of such players worldwide, and the established names in that category, like Leonie Fiebig, Sada Sabali, and Brianna Stewart, are stars, not low-cost developmental options sitting at the edge of a roster. That's exactly why any team that identifies even a glimpse of that archetype in a young player like Pat on an affordable contract would be highly motivated to take a chance. The logic is straightforward. Why wouldn't they? With over a dozen teams across the WNBA, nearly every roster could benefit from a player with her profile. When the financial commitment is low and the risk is minimal, the upside becomes incredibly appealing. Even if a franchise signs her and things don't fully develop, they can move on without any major long-term consequences. That makes the incentive to gamble on her potential exceptionally strong. And that is why many expect that if the Fever choose not to retain her, another organization will move quickly to secure her services. Then there's the additional factor of injuries, which are unavoidable over the course of a demanding WNBA season. When those setbacks occur, teams immediately begin searching for replacements, and wings with size plus shooting ability consistently rank among the most desirable options. Yet according to what has been reported, the Fever may not even prioritize promoting their own developmental players in those moments. Instead, they would reportedly lean toward the free agent market and sign a veteran on a minimum deal. If that approach holds true, then Pat's route to meaningful playing time in Indiana becomes even narrower. So the picture becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. A player who fills a critical positional need, is reportedly showing defensive growth, already brings a polished offensive skill set, and remains on a low-cost, flexible contract, yet still appears absent from the team's immediate rotation plans. That's exactly why this situation has become so fascinating to watch, because the possibility of her leaving within weeks no longer feels like speculation. It feels like a realistic outcome that grows more likely with every strong report coming out of camp. And the irony is impossible to ignore. The better she performs, the faster other teams begin to view her as an opportunity worth pursuing. Every defensive stop, every sign of improvement, every glimpse of that rare two-way potential only increases her market value. So Fever fans are left in a truly unusual position, rooting for her success while simultaneously knowing that each positive development may push her closer to another franchise. That tension is what makes this story so compelling. But beyond the immediate roster battle, this also shines a light on a much bigger issue surrounding Indiana's overall approach to team building and player development. Because if an organization is bringing in young talent, identifying promising skill sets, and then failing to create a legitimate pathway for those players to compete, it raises serious questions about long-term planning. What is the actual vision? Are they focused solely on immediate results, or are they balancing that with sustainable growth? Because in today's game, versatile wings with size and perimeter shooting are among the most valuable assets any team can have. Those players do not come around often, and when they do, smart franchises invest in their development before the rest of the league catches on. If Indiana allows that kind of talent to walk away without fully testing her ceiling, they risk watching another team unlock what they overlooked. And that kind of regret can linger for years. We've seen it happen before. Young players dismissed too early, only to thrive once another organization gives them structure, trust, and real opportunity. That is why this is about more than one roster decision. It is about whether the Fever are maximizing every piece of talent available to them or allowing valuable assets to slip through the cracks. Over the next few weeks, all eyes should remain on how this unfolds, because the conversation is no longer centered on whether Justine Pat belongs in the WNBA. The evidence increasingly suggests she does. The real question now is which team will recognize that first and commit to giving her the chance she deserves. And if Indiana hesitates, another franchise will not. That possibility alone makes this one of the most important developments to follow moving forward. Let me know where you stand on this situation, and if you want more in-depth breakdowns like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for what comes next.